welcome to episode 119 of Silver Lining for Learning. And this is a very, very significant episode, and everybody is actually changing our time because we're covering multiple time zones. You know, we have people in Melbourne, like Tony McKay, that's 10:30, and we got Cher Wei, that's in Singapore, it's 8:30. We got Olipika in Geneva, that's 2:30, and we got Christidi and Kurt Bunk in the East time zone, and Punya and I are on the Pacific time zone. And we've been trying to work on this for a long time because it represents at least the high-performing education systems according to PISA, the global, I typical the global academic horse race. You know, it's we got some of the best education systems who scored highest, and they've been working very hard on trying to imagine the future led by the National Center for Education and the Economy. So today we are very fortunate to have three guests. We have Tony McKay, who was the co-chair of the board of NCEE, who was also the executive director of NCEE for a number of years. And we have Olipika, who used to be with the Finland education system, and who is now in Geneva doing leadership work with the IB, the International Baccalaureate, and Mr. Cher Wei of the Singapore Ministry of Education. So we got Finland, we got Australia, we got Singapore, and we have many other countries. So let me actually invite Tony McKay. Tony, would you want to get started on this? Tell us a little bit about this global project.
Well, thank you, Yong, and it's great to join Silver Lining for Learning and to be part of this conversation with Chris and Kurt and Punya and yourself and colleagues Olipika and Chen Wei. Let me just see if I can make 4 or 5 points very quickly to set the scene. But Yong, you've already done that in a sense, because back in 2017, now if people have got kind of a reasonable short-term memory, you will remember this is pre-COVID, and we convened in Seoul, in South Korea, OECD, the National Center on Education and the Economy, a number of high-performing systems, as you say, referenced by PISA rankings. And in that convening, we said to ourselves, we are facing a lot of challenges in our respective countries. And whilst it is true to say that in OECD PISA terms, a number of jurisdictions are high performing, we're all facing serious challenges. We didn't quite know how big the challenges might be in the coming years, but we were recognizing then that we were emerging in an AI world. We knew that there were huge global sustainability issues. There were matters to do with poverty. There were serious questions to do with threats to democracy. And so a number of conversations were taking place about what kind of learning system will be adequate to the challenges that we are facing, Yong. And it was interesting that in talking to Olipika and to Chen Wei, not only therefore Finland and Singapore, but to South Korea, to Estonia, to Canadian provinces, to Hong Kong, to Japan. The argument was, look, in terms of performance on PISA rankings, on those metrics, things are starting to plateau. There are rapid improvers, but the highest performing countries, say perhaps the performance around China and actually, as it turned out, Estonia in Europe, others were starting to plateau a little. And we were saying to ourselves, well, hold on, how do we prepare for a future that is going to be hugely challenging? And how do we actually have a conversation amongst the leaders of the jurisdictions that currently are in that category? So the idea was, how could we create a space in which we could anticipate the future? This is something that all of us have thought about and have acted upon in previous periods, but there was something really serious about the 2017-18 period. So first point was we had a motivation to come together. And OECD, the National Centre on Education and the Economy based in Washington, DC, said, let's come together and convene some high-level dialogues with the Directors General, the Deputy Directors General of these jurisdictions, and would you be prepared to commit to a couple of years? So over the period of 2018 to 21, we met 6 times, 3 times face-to-face and 3 times due to COVID online. Second point, what was the purpose? The purpose was exactly the issue of how can we anticipate a future? And there was an anxiety about, are we talking about evolution or revolution? Are we talking about optimization of the current system or transformation? And by the way, pretty interesting, isn't it? Here we are, a couple of weeks away from the United Nations General Assembly convening in New York. And what have we got for the first time? A day devoted to transforming our education systems, a summit, right? Center stage. Now, here we are 3-4 years later having the conversation globally. And of course, we've all been having this in our different jurisdictions, but it's very interesting to me that the dialogue that we have referring to today on silver lining for learning is the dialogue that's going to be occupying every UN country in a couple of weeks when we gather in New York City. So let me be clear about a second point here. The purpose was to say you've got to understand why we want to think about redesigning our learning system. It is actually for everything from well-being. We didn't need COVID perhaps to remind us, but COVID did. Finally, learning and well-being, cognitive, social, emotional coming together, and understanding that you can't have economic prosperity or social cohesion or sustainability if you don't have a really powerful system of learning and a powerful system of work. So that was our purpose, to actually address an adequate learning system to those ambitions. Third, the focus. Look, I'll be really sharp here. Of course, we were thinking about the future of learning and the future of work, and that's on everybody's lips now. But we were doing it within the context of an AI world, and we knew, therefore, that the nature of learning had to be of a different order. Complex competencies doesn't quite do it, but at least it's actually a kind of code for what it is that we need to do in terms of shifting the what of learning and the how of learning in a digital environment with pedagogies that are powerful and charged by technology, and the where of learning, not just classrooms. Yong, you were saying just before we began, we haven't been in classrooms, right? And many of our systems would argue that classrooms are only one element of a learning environment, and we have to think about formal, informal, non-formal settings. And clearly the who, with whom, a teaching profession that has to be redesigned. All of that came together for us in our 6 dialogues because we wanted to think about a redefined and reimagined and redesigned system. And that system, obviously, in some people's minds, is much broader than the way in which we currently define education. It's an ecosystem. And we're talking about that now in ways that many of us have been arguing for more than a decade, but now seems to be the language. And look, that means completely changing the governance and the leadership associated with our learning systems. You've got to change not just practice and not just structures. You have to actually change a belief system. Otherwise, the other levels don't move. And finally, let me say, we're into our next phase. We've just launched High Performing Systems for Tomorrow, phase 2. OECD, NCE, and others are coming together again. We've expanded the group, and it's included not just Finland and Estonia and British Columbia and Singapore and Hong Kong and South Korea, but Germany is coming in, so too Australia and England. By the way, that's not adequate. That reads very much as a global north, a conversation. Where we're really starting to see things move is in the global south. So we've got to try and figure out how we have a global conversation about the future of learning and the future of work, where we can all learn from each other. And surely there's got to be an understanding that the current metrics that we have are not adequate to the purpose that we are talking about. We're going to have to shift these metrics if we've got any chance as a globe of what we're now saying will define phase 2 of what we see as high-performing systems of tomorrow, which is about human flourishing. So we think we've been on a fantastic journey. Obviously, Ollie Pecker and Chernway have been fantastic leaders in that dialogue, and we're really looking forward to ways in which we can spread this amongst all of us. And we've now got the attention of the world around this agenda in a way that perhaps we didn't have 4 years ago. So let me be clear. In the spirit of what you do, i.e. reminding us that a lot of the action in innovation is not taking place in policy forums, right? It's not taking place in research circles. It's taking place on the ground, right? That's where the movers and the shapers are really starting to have an influence. So it's hardly as if this work is new, but I do feel as if we've got a global attention to the fact that we need this shift and we need it urgently.
Thank you, Tony. And by the way, we have not interacted with a lot of policymakers. So I am glad we are dealing with you guys from a global perspective, policymakers. And we indeed, Silverline has covered a lot of on the ground innovations in different parts of the world. I was just wondering, Olli-Pekka, would you just share with us from a Finland perspective, your participation, your reflection, and where do you think Finland might be going in the next, I don't know, 5-10 years from this global work? You're on mute, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Happy to do that. Maybe first a few words about the kind of motivation side that Tony was referring to from Finland's perspective. Because what we saw and had been seeing for a while already, that if we take the kind of PISA comparison as a starting point, we have seen that the results on Finland being a high-performing system had actually been decreasing during the last survey circles. And we have been trying to do in Finland kind of more of the same that we have done earlier, and we had noticed that it doesn't improve the situation. So there was an understanding that we have to do something differently. There was also a bit of the kind of an attitude, Finland becoming kind of prisoner of its own success, that you get afraid of changing anything so you won't lose anything. But there is the kind of trap that Finland didn't reach the good PISA results staying the same. It's reached them because it was able to reform. So that was the kind of other reason why we felt that it's extremely important for us not to think that we have all the right answers, but to learn from others on a global context and see together that what the future challenges are. And kind of simultaneously, as this 3-year project went on, all these discussions, we were experimenting in Finland with a new way of implementing education policy. We had an innovation center which had an entirely different approach of kind of convening the education system, different actors together, and kind of doing things in a different way. So I must say that kind of this discussion and dialogue that Tony was telling about was really a strong support for us to have the courage actually to go to the direction of reforming the system. And I must say that if you ask that what is the way that the Finnish system will be going on, I think one thing is clear, and that is the thing that the school level, where all the important things happen, that level and the national policy level, there must be more intimacy between them. They must be much, much more closer together, and they have to co-create and co-develop new solutions together. So it's kind of bottom up and top down at the same time. And I would say that that is the kind of maybe the secret source for the future education systems.
Thank you, Olli-Pekka. That's very nice. I know everybody's looking at Finland as the miracle of education or the place. Now we have another one, that's Singapore. Singapore, I think since TIMSS in the 1990s was considered as a high-performing education system. And I'm sure, you all know about Singapore math in the US. Every parent is, if they care about their children's education, they should buy Singapore math. Now we have Chair Wei from Singapore and Minister of Education to share with us again about the Singaporean, motivation in this global conversation and their decision. I've read your report. I think you guys all pointing to the right directions, and Tony has laid out a very big framework. So Chairman, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it has been a privilege to be able to take part in this project with the high-performing systems. My reflection is that, of course, we learn a lot from the jurisdictions sharing of their thinking and some of their strategies. But my takeaway is that there is quite a large overlap of commonalities across the jurisdictions in the aspirations we want for our students. But there is quite a bit of divergence in our thinking of the paths and the strategies to take us there. And I think that is unavoidable because the education system is very much a function of the larger system it exists in. The cultural, social, political drivers that shape the system as it is. And therefore, they will take slightly different pathways to get to where they feel is the desired destination. And so it's interesting to hear some of these differences of views. It allows us to reflect on our own way forward. I thank you for your kind words on the Singapore education system, but if you talk to many Singaporeans, I think you will get a different impression of their views on our education system. I think we always feel our system is not good enough, especially when you're trying to prepare students for a very uncertain future. So there are broadly two important reforms we are undertaking in our education system to help us prepare our students better for the future. The first has to do with this idea that I think it's a cliche, but the future is increasingly fluid, dynamic, unpredictable. So trying to guess what the students need in life, in work for the next 20, 30 years is an impossible task. And I don't think that's what our education system should set out to do. There are certain attributes that you know for sure that the students will need for life. The character traits, the dispositions to be curious, inquisitive, compassionate, all those things you know for sure they will need for life. You have a good 20 years of their early stage of development to help them develop those attributes. But many of the other knowledge and skills are easily outdated over a span of 5, 10 years. So we know that the world is unpredictable going forward, increasingly so, and the shelf life of knowledge and skills is increasingly shorter. And so if you try to still seek to prepare students for the future by focusing just on the first 20, 25 years of their life, I think you are shortchanging your ability to support them to be thriving throughout life. And so the important transformation we are making in Singapore is not to see our role as in the education system as just front-loading the first 20, 25 years, but to develop a system that can support every Singaporean throughout his or her life for the next 50, 60, 70 years, right? And so this is a mammoth task, but it is a task we have started for about 8 years or so, trying to build system processes and structures to encourage individuals, employers to support the lifelong learning agenda, and to create a system among our polytechnics and universities to support the continuous education of our Singaporeans adults at different stages of their lives. So that's one important shift we are making. The other shift that we are making is the awareness that the growing importance of what we call the 21st century competencies. You may call it by a slightly different name in different parts of the world, but this set of attributes that are perhaps in the earliest years, people call it soft skills, right? But it is really a set of competencies and dispositions that need to complement their cognitive academic development in order for them to thrive in the future. And we're in the process of trying to rebalance our curriculum and assessment so that you free up more time and space for teachers and students to focus on the 21st century's competencies. And that requires us to make some very difficult trade-off. What part of the curriculum, whether it's content or whether it's the depth of the content, the breadth of the content, should you make some adjustments, give something up so that you free up more time for students to become perhaps stronger in other aspects like creativity, cross-cultural skills, civic literacy, info literacy. And those are extremely important skills given what we see of the developments around the world today, right? It's increasingly, it seems to be an increasingly divided world. We are more connected than ever, but those connections sometimes don't seem to galvanize. It seems to divide. We see places where conflicts are brewing. We see students being so engaged in social media that sometimes they mistake information as knowledge or just trapped in their own echo chambers, feeding each other with the same point of view. And I think those are, as educators, those are actually things that we're concerned about. And we ought to work towards helping them to develop the skills and competencies to navigate in this landscape. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very nice. And Chris, you have a question.
Yes, as all of us know, defining what high performing is very tricky and complicated. And I want to make an example to medicine and to determining how high performing in terms of health somebody is. So, you know, we go to the doctor once a year, so it's a little like a high stakes test. And the doctor gives some assessments and gives us advice about our health and also perhaps praise or concern about our health. And that's a very multidimensional process. I mean, if I go to my doctor and the doctor says, hey, your blood pressure is good, you know, you've got a nice pulse here, you know, your nutrition seems to be healthy, go out and have another great year. I'm going to say, wait a minute, what about, you know, my body mass index? What about my cholesterol level? What about this? What about that? It's so high performing in health is complicated. And it's even more complicated if you start to do comparative rankings, because I might be very healthy for my mid 70s, but I'm going to be lower than a not very healthy 30-year-old on a number of dimensions. So there's a kind of value added, you know, dimension to this as well, a situational dimension to this as well. And it almost makes me feel as if the sort of a single number that means high performing, and then you rank people unidimensionally. All of us know that that's very tricky.
Yeah.
It might be better if you had more dimensions and each system could say, I think I'm high performing in X, Y, and Z out of these, 25 things. And here's why I think I'm high performing in those. And by the way, I'm really low performing in these other 4. And I'd like some help, from the countries that are high performing in that. In a way, that would be a healthier system. So is there a question in here somewhere? Yes, there is a question now that I've run around the barn 3 times. I'd like to ask each of you if there's one thing that you could add to the dimension of high performing that we're not currently measuring, maybe because it's really hard to measure, but let's just pretend that we can measure it. What one thing would each of you like to see as part of the definition of high performing that's currently not part of PISA or part of this kind of standard global assessments?
Well, I'll tell you what, Chris, there's nothing like responding in a way that doesn't actually quite address the one thing. But let me just say this to you. This is the conversation. Internationally, we are all saying to ourselves that PISA needs to be reconceived and redeveloped in order to be more inclusive of precisely a multidimensional index of the kind that you're talking about. And that is exactly the work that OECD is engaged in right now. So a roadmap to the future, let's be clear, they haven't only been unidimensional. The innovative domains that they have been actually committed to over the last 3 rounds of PISA have meant, and the next one in terms of creativity, means that we are actually heading in a direction that you are arguing for. But you know, as well as everybody else, that if you're going to move to a multidimensional index, you have to break through the psychometrics of validity and reliability that actually at this point in time, right, are part of the game. Now we're going to have to shift. There's plenty of work being done on complex competencies and the way in which we're going to conceptualize them. But to get to a point where, in fact, people will trust that, right, as part of an index is a big issue. But there are new indices being developed right now, all the way through, not just simply to adding competencies, but to actually what would a healthy ecosystem of learning look like? This is serious work that's actually being undertaken right now. So my feeling is that the conversation that you are encouraging here is the one that we are having globally, and it's the one that OECD appreciates they have got to be a leader in. Let me give you 3 quick metrics, right, that actually would underscore exactly what you're saying. 1, look at the percentage of 15-year-olds that are on the anxiety disorder spectrum. We're talking about 40% across multiple jurisdictions. Look at the first time we ever attempted to measure emotional growth between 10 and 15, which was an attempt last year. What did it show? No growth, right? Now, that's, okay, adolescence is very complex, but that means, would you accept that on literacy and numeracy? No growth in literacy and numeracy over a period of 3 or 4 years. That's what we saw with 10 to 15-year-olds in a very difficult and complex time. And third, have a look exactly at the point that you raised, or maybe it was Yong, namely the difference between opinion and fact. On that item, in the last PISA results, we got 40% of 15-year-olds that can't tell the difference between opinion and fact. Now, if you say, what's the one thing? I would say all of that, right, Chris? All of that's got to be brought into the equation as we think about new metrics for high performance.
Shall I go next? Maybe kind of first say kind of 2 learnings from the 3-year discussions that we had with Chernway and Tony and all the others on this question. The first one is that I think that during those 3 years, and as there was also kind of research done during the project, what we started kind of thinking that as the as the different national systems that were taking part are very different. And actually the societies where they are embedded in are also very different compared to each other. So the question was that how come that the outcomes are good while the systems are so very different? And to me, the answer that I started thinking during the process was that I think actually all those systems developed themselves as systems. So they were able to combine the different elements, whether we're talking about blood pressure or your kind of other health indicators. It was the thing that kind of, I think, was similar to each other. My second point is that I think we also, in our discussions during those 3 years, we came to the conclusion, as we were kind of coming together under the title of high-performing systems, that we have to redefine high-performing systems. That we were not satisfied with how we have been kind of in a way chosen to belong to that group. And I think that was a big moment in our discussions. And the thing that I would like to add, if it could be measured, is the quality of the interaction of the different actors in an education system, starting from the interaction between the students and the teachers, and all the others that enable the system to function with the values of equality and excellence. And actually, to me, the main component there is actually trust. That should be the thing that we should know more about.
Right, Chris, I don't know whether I can provide any further insights to what Oli-Pekka and Tony have shared. But I do agree with you. Any ranking table of a unidimensional indicator doesn't capture the full range of attributes you want to see in a system that is delivering good education to students. And so I believe every system in this project would go beyond just the ranking tables you see, whether at TIMSS or PISA or some other international benchmarking tools. They will have in their own set of evaluations other dimensions that they will look into. But sometimes having that benchmarking is really helpful, because on our own, we've found that when we look at some of these indicators, it's hard to say whether that situation is desirable or not desirable. But once you start having the ability to see how your students fare relative to other systems, you start having a more nuanced and perhaps a deeper insight into whether your system ought to do a bit more in this, or you could actually move away from this and focus on some other areas where you want to improve in. So that has been helpful. And like Tony has pointed out, I found PISA really good in always using the innovative domain to push the a state of knowledge about some areas that we have not been measuring as well, but yet important to measure. So in the past few cycles, they have measured things like collaborative problem-solving skills, global competence. They are coming to measure creative thinking and digital literacy in the next 2 iterations. And so those are things that you typically don't get from very standardized assessment, but yet important to our students' ability to thrive. And if we can gather international experts who develop good instruments to give us a sensing of things, I think that would really help every education system to look hard and look deep. And just to respond to your questions about what attributes would I like to see more of that is currently not being measured, I think there are many if you ask people in the education policy making, but certainly one attribute I'd like to see some ability to get a sense of is resilience. How resilient is our students to the hard knocks of life? Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Chris, that's a wonderful question. You guys give good answers. I think one thing I just want to add measuring human beings in these domains can, of course, distort the situation. I think education or psychometricians have not been as advanced as medicine. In medicine, your blood pressure, this is high, this is no good, your heartbeat is different. I was reading like in resilience, like the interactions with all the Peg was talking about, and even like, with what PISA was trying to measure global competence. There's a lot of debate. I think it's good experiment. At this moment, in my personal opinion, is, a lot of this data should not be shared because we are really not very good with this measurement right now, so, but anyway, thank you guys so much. And Kurt, you have a question?
I'll have a comment first, like Chris. I want to thank you for bringing these people in, Young. This is great. We haven't had a conversation exactly like this. Of course, every week is a unique conversation in Silver Lining for Learning. And I'm teaching designing learning environments this semester, so I am going to make this episode mandatory. I've incorporated Silver Lining for Learning episodes in several assignments, actually. So my students will be watching a number of these. In fact, we've got at least one episode in the list of things that students can view or read. So yeah, they'll definitely want to visit this episode. Also want to say that, I've enjoyed my time in Melbourne, Tony, visiting Deakin University and the Department of Ed in Sydney, and folks at University of Adelaide, Newcastle, Wollongong. I've been all over. I've totally enjoyed being and hearing from folks in Australia, as well as Republic Polytechnic, Chernway, and NTU, National Institute of Education, and Young Technological University. We're doing research right now with Republic Polytechnic on flipped classrooms. So I've always enjoyed that. And then Ali, my career started really in Finland back in the 90s when my friends in Oulu and Turku and Jyväskylä and Joensuu and other places came to Oulu for a symposium or summit that wrapped around a book I was writing or editing at the time on electronic collaboration. And my friends Erno Leitinen and Sanja Järvelä, you may know. So I enjoyed, first off, what Tony had to say, and as he was explicating and talking about what's presently happening, and he used the word adequate. We've got adequate learning systems, and then he started mentioning what high performance learning systems look like in phase 2. But he didn't fully flesh out, because maybe they haven't fleshed it out yet, what phase 2 actually is going to be looking like. So I wonder if all three of you might be able to comment on that. I know Chernwa, am I saying that right? Okay. You talked about overlapping aspirations, but somewhat different systems to operationalize that. We have different paths, you said, different strategies, different approaches. We got common goals, common aspirations. Maybe one of the common things is dispositions, as you said, curiosity, right? And the support mechanisms may vary to get the 21st century skills that you want. Ali talked about, while the outcomes are good, I think you said we still need to redefine what high performance systems are. The systems might not work in this new age now. And so I will point out one other quick thing before you answer. At the start of the pandemic, I had a book on the Global South, MOOCs and Open Ed in the Global South. And we had Indonesia and Sri Lanka and Malaysia, and right nearby, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam and other parts of the world there. But also, we have Rwanda and Sri Lanka and India and so forth. And in my most recent, a few months ago, we had a Transformative Teaching Around the World book come out. And this has got Fulbright award-winning teachers, four from Finland, 2 of whom are still waiting for their book. And we have 3 from Singapore. And they're all award-winning Fulbright teachers. And if you'd like to read anything, just send me a note and I'll send that on to you. But they're fabulous. But they each are talking about the struggles. When we think about Singapore, we think of all this, wonderful stuff going on, but they're honest with me about the struggles that they face to operationalize or to concretize some of the innovative ideas that they established when they visited Indiana University and to redesign the curriculums. They came to us for about 6 months, then went back to Singapore, went back to Finland, and 10 other countries around the world. And the book is about both the success stories as well as the struggles that they faced since they departed here. And we're kind of a community. It's kind of a fun, creative, vibrant community. When they were here, I just felt the energy within Singapore, within Finland, within India, within New Zealand, and all these Singapore, Botswana, and all these places around the world. So I wonder if you could talk to us about high-performing systems, and what phase 2 might look like, maybe phase 3. Maybe Tony should go first since he brought this up, and let Ali and Sharon have a chance to reflect on it a bit. You have it?
I'll tell you what, hey, Kurt, that's fantastic, but I might just reverse the order, if you don't mind. It might be, given that we have had kind of just an initial gathering and then we're coming together literally within the next couple of months, maybe if I ask Ollie Pecker and Sharon Way to say a word, and then I'll make sure, as a result of that, Kurt, that their aspirations are matched by mine. Hey, Ollie Pecker, what about you? Have a go.
Sure, thank you. Kurt, I must say that I'm really impressed in your ability to pronounce all the Finnish names of the cities. I haven't heard that good pronunciation in a long time in international surroundings.
Oh, they wouldn't let me out of the country until I did, you know. Or in the country, actually. Yeah,
very good. I would say that I think we have to look what's happening in the world. We have to really start by seeing that the world we're living now, the challenges we're faced with, the reality of the young people today with, for example, the challenges of well-being that Tony was referring to. I think that response that unfortunately shows in the very kind of serious numbers of mental challenges in young people is a reaction what's happening in the world. And in that sense, to me, kind of learning is actually the relationship between the learner and the world. And it's our duty as educators to make sure that that connection is a strong one, and it enables students to engage, have the competency, have the knowledge, have the skills, the attitudes and values to act and engage in that world. And I think that is actually in today's world a huge challenge, that how do we make it happen? And I think we're still a bit kind of living the information society period and the era where the kind of knowing was central for us human beings. We have a kind of a cognitive bias, I would say, in many of our education systems. And we should be able, also kind of looking at what's the thing that the artificial intelligence is bringing to us. Creating technologies much more faster, more reliable on doing cognitive tasks than we are as humans. So the question is that what is the thing that is most central for us humans? And I think it is the ability for us as humans to support, care, and utilize each other's competencies to reach common goals, like the challenges of climate change. that type of huge challenges. And the other one is actually to be able to make the ethical consideration and kind of problem solving, because that's something that the artificial intelligence will not do on our behalf. But it's our question to look at what's relevant in the world and how we can, and how we see that what are the ethically sustainable solutions, utilizing the best possible knowledge there is to solve and act on those problems. So I see that that's at the core of the future education systems, but it means a lot of changes on the way that how those systems act today.
Yep.
Right. Thanks, Kurt, for posing that question. My own reflection is in phase one, it resulted in rich discussion, and I think we have collected a set of observations that are perhaps more conceptual. At phase two of the project, I think there is some attempt at this stage. It's very early stages, right? Because we have not really have a formal meeting yet, and Singapore is glad to be able to host it in November. But we're going to see whether we can perhaps take some of our discussion into the stage of work where it is potentially more specific, more concrete, and hence perhaps a set of things that could be considered for testing, experimentation, implementation by systems that are keen to do so. And so this idea about building a system that supports human flourishing, we're going to break it down into certain components. What does it mean for the learning environment? What does it mean for pedagogy? What kind of competencies are needed by students? Things like that. So that I think looks like our aspiration at this stage. But I must say, even in phase one, there were attempts to do so. I think in multiple meetings, we have always tried to push the discussion and see whether we can end up with something a bit more concrete and specific. But like I said earlier, it seems difficult because different systems somehow, even when you share similar aspirations, have different constraints, different resources at their disposal, different stages of development at various parts of the system. And so they take different paths going forward. And so again, I'm not trying to be a wet blanket, but I think that there is no one blueprint that you can just ask systems to consider to take you there. You have to make sense of it for yourself, based on your own very unique context, and chart your own path forward. Thank you.
Oh no, my students are going to watch the episode and have the answer.
I tell you what, Kurt, I mean, the thing is that there will need to be the translation, interpretation, and application at a particular level of the kind that Chern Wei talks about. But I think all of us are saying, you've got to change the narrative. This is not, phase two is not about optimization of a current paradigm, right? It is about transformation. It is not a conversation about incremental improvement and some kind of extension of a reform agenda. Now, I'm not saying that that's easy to translate into practice, as Chern Wei says, but the orientation, I think, has got to be the one that we're all talking about. This has got to be a significant shift if we're going to make learning human-centered, if we're going to care for ourselves and for others on the planet, right? You have to have a learning system that is designed to do that. And our current learning system does not do that. That we've got to be prepared to admit that and to say that the future of learning and the future of work, and when I say the future of work, I mean the future of life, right? We're talking about learning a living, has got to shift. Now, this is actually, as Ollie Pekka says, this is about actually not having second-class robots. This is about having first-class human beings. And if you can't have a learning system that produces that, you're in a bit of trouble. In terms of the focus around phase two, when we're talking about, as Chern Wei says, human flourishing, I mean, we're going back to Aristotle and Confucius. We're saying it's about adaptive problem solving. We're saying it's about ethical decision making. We're saying it's about aesthetic perception. Like, can we just regain, right, an understanding of what it's going to take for us to actually learn living that is not at the moment translated into a learning system that's front-loaded, right, and doesn't allow you to develop, right, as humanity adequate to the challenges that we've actually got. What I'm really excited about is that phase 2 is phase 2 and phase 3, because we're now having a global conversation about this. Nobody has got any doubt whatsoever, right? And you've raised this in terms of the Global South, your own work. We're going to have national conversations across the globe coming off the back of the UN. It won't be confined to the so-called global north high-performing systems. Yep. One quick fact, Yong, and by the way, I think you're absolutely right about the complexity around psychometrics and how we're going to measure this stuff. And let's be very, very careful about what indicators we're going to use. But I think that what we have all understood is that the future is not located in those high-performing systems defined by the current PISA metrics. Let's be clear. Brookings did a fantastic piece of work on innovative activity, as you well know. 1,200 cases, across the globe. Interestingly, in a country that doesn't actually rank as high-performing, the US, right? And yet it's got some of the highest performing districts and a couple of the highest performing states globally, but nationally doesn't rank. It's got over 500 innovative activity that actually made the cut on the criteria, but 600 of them were in the Global South. Like, can we actually learn about how we can shift our systems according to what I think both Chernway and Ollie Pecker have said about in the service of humanity? And I think finally we're going to have a phase 2 and a phase 3, Kurt, that actually reaches out to all of us, to be involved in what we see as being the metrics for success, right, for sustainability as people and as a planet. That'd be highly desirable.
Maybe we need that Brookings Institute
guys.
report posted at our website, Punya.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
So I want to really thank you guys. Time is running out. And remember, you guys are the policy makers. You're supposed to deliver the system we all deserve, But anyway, so Punya will have the last question.
All right, thank you.
Punya, go for it.
Thank you so much. So it's more of a comment to be followed by, I'm going to just sort of channel some of our viewers' questions there, because I want to make sure that their voice gets in as well. So I think one sort of a comment and sort of builds on what Chris was starting from, but I think slightly different tack. I think one of the things that we have to learn to be really careful about in these conversations is never to speak in the singular, because we don't live in a present. Our students, our children don't live in one present, they live in multiple. A student's experience of learning in Bangladesh is different from one in Singapore, is different from inner city Phoenix to the suburbs of Philadelphia. I mean, what have you, right? So the point there is that, those contexts are different, and there will be many different futures. So the way AI will affect a student learning in, let's say, Singapore, which has, let's say, if I stereotype, has a culture of testing and so on, where AI systems can actually be successful, as opposed to a student, a poor child in, let's say, Bangladesh or Nigeria, where most probably those AI systems are going to be pretty much surveillance systems, are going to be systems that are going to channel what they watch, how they think, is very different. And so I think one of the things that I feel that, when we talk about policy from this 30,000 foot view, we tend to think of there is an educational system. There isn't. There are many, and there will be many different futures. And I think that's something that's just a comment from my side about how I sort of hope that the conversation goes, because just as Chris said, there are multiple dimensions. And if we try to take one dimension and map it to all, there's problematic. And clearly all of you have sort of spoken to the value of trust, compassion, social emotional learning and so on. So there is that squeezing down of the richness that's happening. But I'm saying that there's another sort of aspect to that. So that's just a comment that I wanted to make, but I want to maybe end with this question from Bob Nelson, and maybe piggybacks off my comment. Is like, how do you see this conversation sustained at scale going forward, but also being sensitive to this fact that like, even if I look at a country like India, it's not one educational system. You have different states, you have different languages, you have the government system, the private school system, and of course the entire sort of overall ecosystem within which misinformation is being spread on WhatsApp. And people in India joke about what is called as WhatsApp University, where if you spout some nonsense, they're like, oh, did you get that on WhatsApp University? So that is a genuine space in which learning or unlearning or mislearning is happening. So how do you see this conversation going while being sensitive to this complexity of this world? Whoever wants to take it, we have 4 minutes, so keep it brief, a minute each maybe, and thank you again for joining us today.
Chernwei, you should go first.
Well, I certainly agree with you, Punyat. I certainly have found that even within a small city state like Singapore, moving from one school to another school, you can immediately feel a difference in culture, the profile of learners. So being a principal of one school where students attend schools daily, had good home support, and leading another school where children may be playing truant, having trouble sustaining just basic meals and things like that, would require very different leadership, different focus. And so that is indeed a given. How do we sustain efforts in educational reform that is not singular and allow all these different diverse learner profiles to benefit? I think it's a challenge that all policymakers will have to take serious considerations to. Thank you.
Ollie-Pekka, why don't you go second?
Yes, I think the question of with the diversity is a very familiar to me in my new position as the DG of the International Baccalaureate, where we are working in 159 countries in public schools, private schools, international schools with kind of different environments, students with different backgrounds coming to enjoy IB programs. And the question really is there that what is the kind of educational core of the programs that is something that is seen valuable all over the world? And what is the kind of local culture, local circumstances that those programs must be tailored into? And how that mix is made to function. So I would say that it's both and. It's the question that we have to understand the different realities and the different circumstances. But at the same time, we are also one world. We have global shared challenges. And there's a need for a kind of a global understanding and identity and ethics for us to be able to solve those questions. So I think we need both diversity and also understanding of the global challenges.
Punya, I'll say two quick things. One, I think it goes to the heart of young people as learners and their agency. And I don't mean agency in terms of voice or some level of decision making. I mean agency in terms of their identity and of their purpose. And I mean in terms of purpose, both their individual and their collective purpose, to actually amplify what Ollie-Pekka is saying. If we can't have a learning system with agency for young people at the center in those terms, we don't have a learning system, either individual or collective. Right? And second, we better make sure we've got a system and an ecosystem that's actually an ally. I don't want a learning system, in using Yong Zhao's point about we're policymakers, which we design somehow not in the service of the learners. We've got to be allies. The wider enabling conditions of the system that Chernwei and Ollie-Pekka have been talking about has got to be designed to support young people's growth in their identity, in the expression of their purpose, and in the expression of their capacity to be able to do good work on behalf of all of us. That, to me, is a great learning system.
Well, thank you. I can't believe
Thank
we've
you. Yeah.
already ended this time. We have we can run this for another 3 weeks, So Tony, maybe you should involve us to broadcast your global sessions. That might be a good idea. But thank you so much, Tony, Ole-Pekka, and Chen Wei. It was wonderful. And now Kurt is going to introduce next episode in using 30 seconds.
So Tony has a great stepping off point because we're going to talk about agency, empowerment, apprenticeship, reinventing schools, the future of ed, future of work, with our next guest, Michael Horn, who has a new book, From Reopen to Reinvent, and he has a newsletter that you all should subscribe to on the future of education. He's a person who's worked with Clayton Christensen, who Chris was a colleague of before he passed away, about disruptive classrooms. So come next week. It'll be at our normal, in 2 weeks, sorry, 2 weeks at our normal time, 5:30 p.m. Eastern and 2:30 p.m. Pacific.